On the coldest night in 30 years, when the temperature outside dropped to 22 degrees below zero and the wind chill made it feel like 40 below, Amos Baylor opened the heavy wooden door of his barn in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and walked into a wall of warm air that smelled like fresh hay and sweet cow breath. 54 Holstein dairy cows stood calmly in their stalls, chewing cud, breathing slow, their black and white hides steaming gently in the warm glow of a single kerosene lantern. The thermometer nailed to the center post of the barn read 55 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to work in shirt sleeves, warm enough that the water troughs hadn't even thought about freezing, warm enough that the youngest calf, born just 3 days ago, was sleeping on a bed of clean straw with her legs tucked under her belly like a house cat on a sofa. Outside, the world was dying. A quarter-mile down the road, inside a massive 200-cow commercial dairy operation owned by a farmer named Brian Kowalski, the scene was the opposite of peace. The power grid had collapsed 18 hours earlier under the weight of a catastrophic ice storm that snapped transmission lines across 3 counties. Brian's $100,000 industrial heating system, 4 massive electric radiant heaters suspended from the steel ceiling beams, backed up by 2 propane-fired forced air furnaces, had gone silent and dark. The temperature inside Brian's steel-framed barn had dropped from a climate-controlled 68 degrees to 9 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 12 hours. The water lines had frozen solid. The automatic milking system was dead. 2 newborn calves had already died from hypothermia. Their small bodies curled stiff on the frozen concrete floor. The rest of the herd was huddled together in the far corner, shivering, refusing to eat, their milk production crashing toward zero. Brian had spent over $100,000 on climate control equipment for that barn. State-of-the-art insulated steel panels, automated ventilation fans, digital temperature monitoring, backup generators. But the generators had run out of propane by hour 14 because the propane delivery truck couldn't make it through the ice-covered roads, and the steel walls of his modern barn, for all their engineering, conducted cold like a metal spoon stuck in a bowl of ice cream. Amos Baylor had spent $600 on straw bales, and his barn was 55 degrees. If you've ever been told that the old ways don't work anymore, if you've ever been laughed at for choosing the simple, inexpensive solution when everyone around you was spending fortunes on technology that promised to solve everything. This story is about a man whose barn walls were made of hay bales and whose heater was a herd of cows, and what happened when the coldest night in a generation proved that nature's engineering has been solving this problem for a lot longer than we have. To understand how 400 bales of wheat straw kept 54 cows warm in 22 below zero weather without a single watt of electricity, you have to understand 2 things that most people never think about: how much heat a cow actually produces, and what happens to that heat when the walls of your barn are made of the right material. Amos Baylor was 57 years old. He had been milking cows since he was 9, when his father first put a stool and a bucket in front of him and told him to figure it out. He ran a modest dairy operation, 54 head of Holstein, milked by hand twice a day with the help of his 2 oldest sons, selling raw milk to a local cooperative that supplied small organic creameries in the region. His barn was nothing fancy. It was an old-style Pennsylvania bank barn, built into the side of a hill, with stone foundation walls on the lower level and heavy timber framing above. The upper level stored hay and equipment. The lower level, sheltered by the hillside on 3 sides, housed the cows. It had been built by Amos's great-grandfather in 1923, and while it had been repaired and maintained over the decades, it was essentially the same structure: wooden walls, wooden beams, a tin roof, and a dirt floor covered with straw bedding. Every November, as the first cold winds of winter began to bite, Amos performed a ritual that his father and grandfather had performed before him. He hitched his team of Belgian draft horses to the hay wagon, drove out to the straw storage barn, where the wheat straw from the summer harvest was stacked, and began hauling bales. Over the course of 3 days, Amos and his sons stacked 400 rectangular bales of compressed wheat straw against every exterior wall of the cow barn. They stacked them 3 bales deep and as high as the eaves, roughly 8 feet tall. They packed them tight, shoulder to shoulder, leaving no gaps. Where the straw met the wooden wall, they pressed handfuls of a thick paste made from creek bottom clay mixed with po-white lime into every crack, every knothole, every gap between boards. When they were finished, the barn looked like it was wearing a giant golden coat. The straw walls added nearly 3 feet of thickness to every side of the building. From the road, it looked absurd, a barn buried in hay. And that's exactly what Brian Kowalski said when he drove past in his heated pickup truck on a cold November morning and saw Amos and his boys stacking the last row of bales. Brian rolled down his window and called out across the fence. "Amos, what are you doing, building a fort? You know they make insulation panels now, right? Spray foam, R30 fiberglass. You don't have to bury your barn in hay like it's 1850. Amos set down the bale he was carrying and wiped the sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "The straw works fine, Brian. It's kept these cows warm for 100 years. Brian laughed. "Straw? Against a polar vortex? Good luck with that, neighbor." He rolled up his window and drove off, shaking his head. What Brian didn't understand, and what most people raised in the age of electric everything never think about, is that straw is one of the most effective natural insulating materials on the planet. And the reason is almost absurdly simple. A bale of wheat straw is not a solid block of plant fiber. It's a compressed bundle of hollow tubes. Each individual stalk of wheat straw is a thin, dry cylinder with a hollow center, like a tiny drinking straw made of plant material. When you compress thousands of these hollow stalks together into a bale, you create millions upon millions of tiny pockets of trapped, still air. And trapped, still air is the single best insulator that exists in nature. Think about it this way. A down jacket doesn't keep you warm because of the feathers. The feathers themselves have almost no thermal value. What keeps you warm is the air that gets trapped between the feathers. Your body generates heat. The trapped air holds that heat close to your skin. The feathers just create the structure that keeps the air from moving. A straw bale wall works on the exact same principle, just on a barn-sized scale. The millions of hollow straw tubes trap enormous volumes of still air. That trapped air acts like a giant invisible blanket wrapped around the building. Heat generated inside the barn cannot pass through that air barrier easily, and cold wind from outside cannot penetrate it. A single 3-foot-thick wall of stacked straw bales has an insulation value roughly equivalent to, and in many cases superior to, the most expensive commercial spray foam insulation systems on the market. And it costs almost nothing, because wheat straw is a waste product that most grain farmers either burn or leave to rot in the field after harvest. But the straw is only half of the equation. The other half is the cows themselves. Most people think of a cow as an animal that eats grass and makes milk, but from a purely physical standpoint, a cow is also a biological furnace. A mature Holstein dairy cow weighing 4,400 pounds generates roughly 4,000 to 5,000 BTUs of body heat per hour just by existing, digesting food, breathing, maintaining her core body temperature of 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in terms anyone can understand, a single adult dairy cow produces approximately the same amount of heat as a 1,500-watt electric space heater running on high, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Amos had 54 cows in his barn. That's 54 living space heaters, generating heat around the clock, without consuming a single watt of grid electricity or a single gallon of propane. Combined, his herd was producing roughly the same thermal output as a mid-sized home furnace, enough to heat a 3,000-square-foot house in the dead of winter. The only question was whether the barn could hold that heat in. And that's where the straw walls did their job. The 3-foot thick straw barrier around every wall trapped the heat, generated by the cows inside the barn, and prevented the brutal wind chill from stealing it away. The clay and lime paste sealed every crack, eliminating drafts that would have carried warm air out and sucked freezing air in. The stone foundation, buried in the hillside, provided natural earth temperature insulation on 3 sides of the lower level, because soil 4 feet underground stays at a constant 50 degrees year-round, regardless of what the air temperature is doing above. The result was a perfectly balanced thermal system. The cows generated the heat. The straw held the heat. The earth steadied the temperature. No electricity, no fossil fuel, no moving parts, no monthly bill. When the polar vortex hit in late January, Amos didn't panic. He didn't rush to buy generators or call propane delivery companies. He simply did his evening milking as usual, made sure the water troughs were full, added an extra layer of fresh straw bedding for the youngest calves, and closed the barn doors. The temperature outside dropped to -22 by midnight. The wind howled across the frozen fields at 40 miles per hour, driving the wind chill to 40 below. It was the kind of cold that cracked the plastic housing on outdoor electrical boxes, froze diesel fuel solid in tractor tanks, and killed exposed livestock in hours. Inside Amos's straw-wrapped barn, the thermometer stayed between 53 and 57 degrees all night long. The cows lay down on their straw beds, chewing peacefully, radiating their steady furnace heat into the protected air. The kerosene lantern flickered. The barn creaked gently in the wind, but the cold never got in. At 4:30 the next morning, Amos's oldest son, Daniel, walked into the barn to begin the morning milking. He had wrapped a wool scarf around his face to survive the 100-yard walk from the farmhouse. When he opened the barn door, the wave of warm air that hit him was so dramatic that his glasses fogged up instantly. "Good morning, girls," Daniel said to the cows, pulling off his gloves. He didn't need them in here. Meanwhile, across the county, disaster was unfolding. The ice storm had knocked out power to over 40,000 homes and farms. Backup generators that ran on propane were dying one by one as fuel supplies ran out. Commercial dairy barns built with steel frames and thin insulated metal panels, designed to be heated by electric systems, were hemorrhaging heat through their walls like sieves. Brian Kowalski's barn hit 9 degrees by sunrise. His cows were in distress. Their udders were painfully swollen because the automatic milking machines couldn't run without power. 2 calves had died overnight. Brian was on the phone screaming at the propane company, but no trucks were moving on the ice-covered highways. By noon, on the second day of the blackout, Brian couldn't take it anymore. He pulled on every layer of clothing he owned, started his truck, which took 4 tries because the diesel fuel had gelled in the cold, and drove the quarter-mile to Amos's farm. He found Amos in the barn, sitting on a wooden stool, hand-milking a cow into a steel pail. The barn was warm. The cows were calm. A barn cat was sleeping on a hay bale in the corner. It looked like a normal Tuesday morning. Brian stood in the doorway, ice crystals melting on his eyelashes, and stared. "Amos, how is it warm in here? You don't have power. You don't have a furnace. How is it 55 degrees in your barn when mine is 9? Amos set the milk pail aside and stood up. "Come in and close the door, Brian. You're letting the cold in." Brian stepped inside and closed the heavy door behind him. The warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. He unzipped his coat. "The cows heat the barn," Amos said simply. "They always have. Each one of these girls throws off enough heat to warm a small room. 54 of them together can heat this whole space just by breathing and digesting. The straw walls outside hold that heat in. It can't escape. And the cold wind can't get through 3 feet of packed straw. Brian looked at the walls. He could see the interior wooden boards, the same boards that had been there for 100 years. But he knew that on the other side of those boards was a 3-foot wall of compressed straw that he had laughed at 2 months ago. 3 feet of straw, Brian repeated slowly. 3 feet of straw, Amos confirmed. Each straw is a little hollow tube full of air. Millions of them packed together. Air doesn't move heat well, so the warmth stays in and the cold stays out. It's the same reason a down jacket keeps you warm. It's not the feathers, it's the air trapped between them. Brian sat down heavily on a hay bale. He rubbed his face with both hands. I spent $100,000 on heating equipment for my barn. Electric heaters, propane backup, insulated steel panels, digital controls. And right now, at this moment, my calves are dying because none of it works without electricity. And your barn, which is wrapped in hay bales and heated by cow breath, is 55 degrees. Amos didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He simply asked, "How many calves do you have that need warmth right now?" 12. 3 are newborns. Bring them here. We have room in the back stalls. We can keep them warm until your power comes back. Brian's eyes widened. You'd do that? After I laughed at your straw walls? Amos put his hand on Brian's shoulder. The straw doesn't hold grudges, Brian, and neither do I. Go get your calves before they freeze. Brian drove back through the ice, loaded 12 shivering calves into his livestock trailer, and brought them to Amos's barn. Within an hour, the calves were lying on warm straw bedding, drinking warm milk that Daniel had hand-milked that morning, their shivering slowly stopping as the steady 55-degree warmth of the straw-wrapped barn brought them back to life. The blackout lasted 4 days. During those 4 days, Amos's barn never dropped below 52 degrees. He milked his cows on schedule, by hand, by lantern light, and stored the milk in insulated steel cans in the stone-walled spring cellar beneath the barn, where the constant earth temperature kept it cold enough to preserve. Brian lost 6 calves total during the blackout. His milk production dropped to 0 for over a week, costing him thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Several other large dairy operations in the county suffered similar losses. The total economic damage to the local dairy industry from the 4-day blackout was estimated at over $2 million. Amos lost nothing. Not a single calf. Not a single day of milking. Not a single dollar. When the power finally came back on and the ice began to melt, Brian returned to pick up his 12 calves, all of them alive and healthy. He stood in Amos's barn doorway and looked at the golden wall of straw bales one more time. Amos, I have a question. Go ahead. How much did all this straw cost you? $600. I grew most of it myself. Just paid for the baling twine and the labor to stack it. Brian closed his eyes for a moment. $600. I spent $100,000. And your $600 worked when my $100,000 didn't. Amos smiled gently. It's not that your equipment is bad, Brian. It's that it depends on something you can't control, the power grid. When that goes away, everything connected to it goes away too. The straw doesn't depend on anything except being straw. And the cows don't depend on anything except being cows. When you build a system out of things that can't be turned off, you build a system that can't fail. Brian nodded slowly. The following autumn, before the first frost, he hired a crew to stack 600 bales of wheat straw against the exterior walls of his steel barn. He kept his electric heaters as the primary system, but the straw gave him something His $100,000 equipment never could. A backup that didn't need fuel, didn't need electricity, and couldn't be knocked out by a storm. Today, if you drive through the dairy country of Lancaster County in late November, you'll see a sight that would have seemed strange just a few years ago. Modern steel dairy barns with golden walls of straw bales stacked against their sides, standing next to traditional Amish barns that have been wrapped in straw for over a century. The old way and the new way, standing side by side. Because sometimes the oldest technology isn't obsolete. It's just been waiting for us to remember why it worked in the first place. If this story brought you value today, or if you know a farmer, homesteader, or livestock owner who could benefit from this simple straw bale insulation wisdom, share this video with them. Sometimes the best backup system doesn't come from a catalog, it comes from a wheat field. Subscribe to the Country Porch, hit the notification bell, and tell us in the comments, have you ever used straw bales for insulation on your property? And remember, on the farm, the warmest barn isn't the one with the most expensive heater. It's the one that knows how to hold the heat that's already inside. God bless, and we'll see you on the next story.